Marcellus was 39 years old, made a base salary of $148,000 a year as an offshore drilling engineer for Halliburton, and after 12 months of brutal, isolating work in Angola, he was finally, blessedly, home. The air inside the arrivals terminal at George Bush Intercontinental Airport was thick with the familiar Houston humidity, a damp blanket he hadn't realized he'd missed. It was 2:17 p.m. on a Sunday. For 365 days, he had dreamed of this moment, walking through his own front door. The scent of the lemon verbena candle Kaya always burned, the weight of his own mattress, the quiet hum of his own refrigerator. He had sacrificed a year of his life, trading comfort and companionship for a grueling contract that paid out a staggering $340,000. It was enough with his savings to kill the mortgage on the house in Sugar Land. The house he had bought 5 years before he even met Kaya, a 3,000-square-foot brick home on a quiet, tree-lined street that represented the sum of all his ambitions. To own it outright, to be truly free of debt before he turned 40, was a dream he had shared with her on their second date. She had seemed to share it with him, her eyes wide with admiration. "Imagine, baby," she had whispered. "No more mortgage payments. We could do anything." He bypassed the taxi line, his single duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and went to the rental car counter. He had sold his trusty 2015 Ford F-150 before he left, a practical move to save on insurance and avoid letting it sit for a year. Kaya had her own car, a reliable 2018 Honda Accord. He'd get a new truck in a week or two. For now, a generic $58 a day Nissan Altima would do. The drive south on I-69 was a blur of concrete and familiar green signs. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Every grueling 16-hour shift, every lonely night listening to the roar of the ocean from the platform, every pixelated video call with Kaya where her face would freeze and lag, it had all been worth it. The final wire transfer had cleared 3 days ago. The mortgage was gone. The house was his. Theirs. He turned onto his street, Oakmont Drive, and a smile finally broke across his face. The familiar live oaks draped their branches over the road, creating a tunnel of green. He saw his house, the red brick glowing warm in the afternoon sun, but then he saw something else. Parked in his driveway, right where his F-150 used to be, was a gleaming white BMW 3 Series. It was brand new, the temporary paper license plate still taped inside the rear window. It was a car that cost at least $43,000. He didn't recognize it. He frowned, a flicker of confusion. Maybe Kaya had a friend over to welcome him home. A surprise party. He braced himself, a little weary from the 22-hour flight, but ready to be gracious. He parked the Altima on the curb, grabbed his bag, and walked up his own driveway. The front door was unlocked. He had no idea as he pushed it open that he was stepping into the ruins of his life. He had no idea that the sacrifice he had made was not for his future, but for theirs. What he didn't know was that the concept of theirs had been rewritten in his absence. He stepped inside, expecting the scent of lemon verbena. Instead, the air was heavy with the smell of fried plantains and a cloying, cheap air freshener, the kind that smelled like synthetic pine. The television was blaring a soccer game, so loud the floor vibrated slightly. And sitting in his favorite leather armchair, the one he'd spent a month of paychecks on after his first promotion, was a man he recognized with a jolt. His father-in-law, Prosper. Prosper's feet were propped up on the matching ottoman, and he was wearing a pair of Marcellus's house slippers. Marcellus stood frozen in the entryway, the duffel bag suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He was about to learn that some betrayals aren't a single, sharp act, but a slow, creeping occupation. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? Share your story in the comments below. The decision had been made a little over a year ago. in the warmth of their shared bed. It was a Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds of their master bedroom in the Sugar Land house. Marcellus had bought the four-bedroom home when he was 34, a single man with a solid career, pouring his focus and his Halliburton paychecks into the down payment and the monthly notes. The mortgage was his only debt, a hefty $3,200 a month that was manageable on his $148,000 salary but still felt like a chain. Kaya, whom he'd married 2 years prior, traced patterns on his chest. Her deep brown skin was luminous in the morning light. "I was looking at our budget again," she said, her voice soft. "If we just keep paying the minimum, this house won't be ours for another 22 years. Marcellus sighed. "I know, baby, but we're doing okay." "Okay isn't what you deserve," she said, looking up at him. "You work so hard." "I saw an internal posting at Halliburton for a senior engineer on the Angola Deepwater project. The pay is insane." He knew the postings she meant. They were called hardship assignments for a reason. 12 months straight, no leave, living on a platform off the coast of West Africa. The company compensated you handsomely for the isolation and the risk. The number she was talking about was north of $300,000 for the year, on top of his base salary. "That's a year away from you," he said immediately. The thought was unbearable. "It's 1 year," she countered, her voice earnest. 1 year, Marcellus. We could pay off the entire house, the whole thing. Gone. $340,000. No more mortgage. We'd have an extra $38,000 a year to save, to travel, to live. She sold the dream beautifully. She talked about trips to Italy, about finally replacing her 2018 Honda Accord, which she claimed was becoming a money pit, despite its low mileage. With a $65,000 Lexus RX 350 she'd been eyeing. He looked around the bedroom, the sturdy oak furniture he'd picked out, the framed photos on his nightstand of his parents, both gone now. This house was his anchor. The idea of owning it free and clear, of severing that final financial tie to a bank, was a powerful lure. It felt like the ultimate security, the foundation upon which he and Kaya could build their forever. "My name isn't even on the deed, you know," Kaya added lightly, as if it were an afterthought. "It's your house. I just live in it." It was a subtle, masterful jab. He'd owned the house for 3 years before they married, and his lawyer at the time had advised him to keep it as separate premarital property. It wasn't about a lack of trust in Kaya. It was just sound financial planning. But she knew how to make it sound like a slight. "It's our home," he corrected her gently, "and this would be for us." The discussion continued for weeks. Kaya was persistent. She made spreadsheets. She showed him brochures for Tuscan villas. She talked about freedom. Her family, her mother Odette, and father Prosper, encouraged it too. During a family dinner, Odette had patted his hand. "You're a good man, Marcellus, providing for my baby girl. A year will fly by, and you'll come back a king to his castle." Prosper had nodded in agreement, adding, "A man's gotta do what a man's gotta do." Her brother, Bishop, had just shrugged, more interested in the $250 bottle of scotch Marcellus had bought for the occasion. They seemed like a normal, supportive family. Odette was a bit overbearing, always offering unsolicited advice on everything from cooking to finances. Prosper was quiet, content to let his wife do the talking. Bishop, in his late 20s, was perpetually between opportunities, a charming but lazy young man who still lived with his parents. Marcellus saw them as Kaya's quirky but harmless baggage. He had no idea they were a pack, waiting for the alpha to leave the territory. Finally, he agreed. He signed the contract. The plan was simple. The massive paychecks would be direct deposited into a new, separate savings account in his name only. It was cleaner that way for the international transfers. When the contract ended, he'd transfer the lump sum to the mortgage company. Kaya had agreed it was the smartest way. "Keep it simple," she'd said with a supportive smile. The last night before he left, they sat on the back patio he had built with his own 2 hands. The Houston stars were faint but present. "I'm going to miss this," he said, holding her hand. "I'm going to miss you." "I'll be right here waiting," she promised, kissing his knuckles. "I'll take care of our home. It'll be perfect when you get back." It was a perfect lie, delivered with perfect sincerity. He believed every word. He left the next morning, his heart both heavy with leaving and light with the promise of his return to a life of complete financial freedom. The facade of their domestic normalcy was flawless, a beautiful stage set for a play whose tragic final act he could never have imagined. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping infestation, a series of seemingly small compromises that metastasized in the vacuum of his absence. The audience could see it unfolding month by month, while Marcellus saw only the curated snapshots Kaya chose to send him. Month 1. The Guest. 2 weeks after Marcellus's flight to Luanda, Kaya called her mother, Odette. "Mommy, I'm so lonely in this big house," she'd cried, the tears genuine enough. The 3,000 square feet that felt just right with Marcellus now felt cavernous and silent. Odette, who had been waiting for this exact invitation, was packed within the hour. "I'll just come stay for a little while, baby girl," she'd said, "just to keep you company. Your father is getting on my last nerve anyway." Odette arrived with 2 oversized suitcases filled not with clothes for a weekend, but with the contents of her vanity, her favorite cooking pots, and framed family photos. She chose the guest bedroom downstairs, the one with the ensuite bathroom. Within a week, she had replaced the neutral, hotel-style bedding Marcellus had chosen with a gaudy floral comforter set that cost $300 from Dillard's. She complained about his coffee maker, a top-of-the-line $400 Breville machine, and bought a cheap $25 Mr. Coffee because it was less complicated. When Kaya had her weekly video call with Marcellus, Odette was conveniently out of frame. "How's the house?" he'd ask, his face tired on the flickering screen. "Oh, it's fine," Kaya would say brightly. "A little empty without you. I'm just watching movies and missing you." She didn't mention her mother was in the next room, watching reality TV at a deafening volume. Month 3. The Reunion. Prosper arrived. Odette announced one evening that she missed him and couldn't bear to be apart. Kaya, already accustomed to not being alone, agreed. "Poppy can stay for a bit," she reasoned. "The house is big enough." But Prosper didn't move into the downstairs guest room with his wife. Odette had decided the master bedroom, Marcellus and Kaya's bedroom, was more suitable. "This bed is much better for my back," she declared, pointing at the $4,000 Tempur-Pedic mattress Marcellus considered his single greatest luxury. "And look at this bathroom! A soaking tub!" Kaya, weak-willed and worn down by her mother's force of personality, moved her own things into the second upstairs guest room, across the hall from Marcellus's office. She told herself it was temporary. When Marcellus called, she'd take the call in her room, carefully angling the camera so he would only see the familiar headboard of their shared bed. The lie was becoming more complex, requiring staging. "Everything okay?" he asked once, noticing a slight echo in her voice. "Perfect," she lied smoothly. "Just sitting in our bed, wishing you were here." In reality, her parents were sleeping in that bed, Odette wearing one of Marcellus's old T-shirts as a nightgown. Month 6. The Opportunist. Bishop, Kaya's brother, got laid off from his sales job. It was the 3rd time in 5 years. Instead of looking for a new apartment, his first call was to Kaya. "Sis, I'm in a tight spot," he'd said. "Can I crash on the couch for a week or two?" A week or two turned into a permanent residence. The couch was quickly deemed unacceptable. "Man, I can't sleep on this thing," he complained. His eyes landed on the closed door of Marcellus's home office. "What's in there?" "That's Marcellus's office," Kaya said, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Odette scoffed. "He's not using it. He's a world away. Let the boy have a proper room." And so, Marcellus's office became Bishop's bedroom. It was the heart of Marcellus's private world. The walls were lined with bookshelves holding his engineering textbooks, his collection of classic science fiction, and photos of his late father. His desk was a custom-built slab of walnut where he worked on side projects. His degrees and professional certifications were framed on the wall. Bishop saw none of that. He saw a room to be conquered. He pushed the desk against a wall, piled the books into a corner, and took the framed degrees down, leaning them against the wall behind a chair. He moved in his $3,000 custom-built gaming PC, a monstrous tower of flashing LED lights, and a massive curved monitor. The quiet, studious room was transformed into a perpetually dark cave, smelling of stale energy drinks and punctuated by the sounds of virtual gunfire. One evening, Odette stood in the doorway watching Bishop play his game. "You know," she said to Kaya, who stood beside her, "Marcellus doesn't really have any taste. All these dark woods and boring books. This house needs a woman's touch, some life." Kaya, now completely swept up in her family's narrative, nodded. "You're right, Mommy." The next week, the redecorating began. They started selling Marcellus's things. His solid, comfortable living room set, which he'd paid $5,000 for, was listed on Facebook Marketplace for $500. "It's too dark and heavy," Odette declared. They replaced it with a flimsy, fashionable white sectional from a discount furniture store for $1,800, bought on a new credit card opened in Kaya's name. His dining room table, a classic stickly piece inherited from his grandfather worth over $8,000, was sold for a pitiful $1,000 to make way for a glass and chrome monstrosity that left fingerprints everywhere. During a phone call, Marcellus mentioned the final mortgage payment was only a few months away. "I can't wait to be home, baby, to just sit in my chair and relax." There was a brief pause on Kaya's end. "Me too," she said, her voice a little too high. His chair had been sold 3 weeks prior. Her father, Prosper, was at that very moment sitting in its replacement, a hideous, oversized faux leather recliner with built-in cup holders and USB ports. A $900 eyesore from Rooms to Go. Month 9. The final insult. The idea for the nursery was Odette's masterpiece of psychological warfare. "You and Marcellus will want to start a family as soon as he's back," she said to Kaya one afternoon. "You're not getting any younger, you know. We should get a room ready for the baby." Her eyes fell on the door to Bishop's room, Marcellus's former office. "Bishop can move into the other guest room. This room has the best light. It would be a perfect nursery." Bishop, not wanting to give up his man cave, protested. But Odette was relentless. The plan was adjusted. Bishop would stay, but the room would still be transformed. They justified it as a multi-purpose space. They packed Marcellus's life into cheap plastic bins. His collection of novels, his university diploma from Texas A&M, his Engineer of the Year award from Halliburton, a framed photo of him and his father at a fishing tournament, even his father's old watch which he kept on the desk. It was all unceremoniously dumped into $15 tubs from Walmart and stacked in the hottest corner of the garage. Then they painted the room. The elegant, sober navy blue Marcellus had chosen was covered with a sickly pastel yellow. They bought a $600 crib, a $400 changing table, and a rocking chair. They hung up mobiles of cartoon animals. It was a complete erasure of his identity from the room, replaced by a hypothetical future that served their own purposes. It was a way of staking a permanent claim of saying, "This space belongs to the family now, to the future we decree." In their last video call, just a week before his return, Marcellus looked haggard, but happy. "It's done, Kaya. The mortgage is paid. I have the confirmation. We own it." Kaya smiled, her eyes glistening with what he took for tears of joy. "Oh, baby, I'm so proud of you. I can't wait for you to come home to what you've built for us." Behind her, out of the camera's view, the house was filled with the noise and clutter of her family. Her father was asleep in his chair, her brother was yelling at his video game, and her mother was in the kitchen, complaining that the new pots and pans she'd bought on Kaya's credit card weren't non-stick enough. The betrayal was complete, a fully realized universe of disrespect waiting for its creator to step back inside and see what had become of his world. The front door of his Sugarland home swung inward, and the reality of the situation hit Marcellus not as a thought, but as a full-body assault on his senses. The air, thick with the smell of frying oil and cheap pine cleaner, was the first violation. The second was the sound. A Spanish-language soccer broadcast, the announcer's frantic voice turned up to a volume that made the very air in the foyer feel tight and agitated. Then he saw him. Prosper, his father-in-law, a man he had always treated with deference and respect, was lounging in his chair. Not just any chair. It was the $4,000 distressed leather armchair from Restoration Hardware that Marcellus had promised himself for years. It was his Sunday afternoon chair, his reading chair, his thinking chair. And Prosper was in it, socked feet propped on the ottoman, a half-empty bag of potato chips resting on his stomach. He was wearing a pair of blue plaid fleece slippers that Marcellus recognized with a sickening lurch. They were his own, a Christmas gift from Kaya 2 years ago. Prosper glanced up, his expression not one of surprise or shame, but of mild annoyance at the interruption. "Oh, hey, you're back," he grunted, before turning his attention back to the massive 75-inch television screen that now dominated the living room wall. Marcellus's own perfectly good 55-inch Samsung, a modest $800 television, was gone. This new one was a high-end OLED, the kind that cost upwards of $3,500. Before Marcellus could process this, his mother-in-law, Odette, bustled out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Marcellus, you're here. Kaya didn't say you were coming today." Her voice was a performance of surprise, loud and brittle. She rushed forward and gave him a hug that felt more like an appraisal, her eyes scanning him up and down. "You look skinny. They didn't feed you over there?" The kitchen behind her was unrecognizable. His sleek, minimalist space was cluttered with appliances he'd never seen. A garish red air fryer, $150, a massive multi-cooker, $200, and a collection of mismatched, brightly colored utensils hanging from a magnetic strip on the wall. His carefully curated set of Wusthof knives was nowhere in sight. Just then, a bedroom door upstairs creaked open, and his brother-in-law, Bishop, trudged down the stairs yawning. He was wearing basketball shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair uncombed. He blinked at Marcellus as if seeing a ghost. "Whoa, he's back," Bishop said to no one in particular, then shuffled past him toward the kitchen, presumably in search of food. He didn't say hello. He didn't make eye contact. He acted as if Marcellus were an unexpected delivery man. And finally, Kaya appeared. She came rushing down the stairs, her face a carefully constructed mask of delight. "Baby, oh my God, you're home!" She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into a tight embrace. But it felt wrong. Her body was tense, and her hug was a shield, a way to block his view of the living room, of her father in his chair. "You should have told me you were on your way. I would have picked you up. We would have planned something." The words were a torrent, designed to overwhelm and disorient. "It's okay," Marcellus said, his voice quiet, hollow. He gently disengaged from her hug, his eyes scanning the room. The living room furniture was all wrong. His solid wood coffee table was gone, replaced by a cheap-looking glass and chrome thing. The beautiful, hand-knotted Persian rug he'd inherited from his grandmother was gone, replaced by a shaggy, synthetic gray carpet. What happened to the furniture?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Odette jumped in before Kaya could answer. "Oh, that old stuff? It was so dark and dreary, Marcellus. We just brightened the place up for you. It's more modern now, don't you think?" Kaya grabbed his hand. "Come on, let me take your bag. You must be exhausted." She tried to lead him upstairs, but he resisted, pulling his hand away gently. "I want to see my office," he said, a cold dread beginning to crystallize in his chest. "Oh, well, we made a little change in there," Kaya said quickly, her smile faltering. "A good change. A surprise?" He walked past her and up the stairs, his footsteps feeling heavy on the plush new runner that covered the hardwood. He walked down the hall to the room that had been his sanctuary. He pushed the door open. The navy blue walls were gone, replaced by a cheerful, nauseating yellow. The scent of fresh paint still lingered. His desk was gone. His bookshelves were gone. His framed degrees and awards were gone. In their place stood a white wooden crib, a changing table with a cartoon giraffe painted on it, and a rocking chair with a floral cushion. The room had been turned into a nursery. A nursery? They didn't have a child. They weren't even trying. He felt the air leave his lungs. It was an act of such profound and absolute erasure. They hadn't just moved his things. They had obliterated his presence, paving over it with a future he had no part in creating. "It's for the baby," Odette said, having followed him up the stairs. "For when you and Kaya decide to start your family. We wanted to get it all ready for you." He didn't respond. He turned and walked slowly, deliberately. Back down the stairs and through the house, heading for the garage. Kaya trailed behind him, her voice a frantic buzz. "Baby, talk to me. Don't be like this. It was supposed to be a happy surprise." He pulled the door to the garage open. The first thing he saw was the heat shimmering in the air. The Houston summer had turned the space into an oven, and stacked against the far wall, warping in the oppressive heat, were 6 cheap, semi-translucent plastic storage bins from Walmart, each one costing no more than $15. He could see the spines of his books pressed against the plastic. He walked over and lifted the lid off the top bin. Inside, thrown together without care, were his most treasured possessions. His engineering textbooks were jumbled with his collection of first edition Philip K. Dick novels. On top of them lay his framed diploma from Texas A&M, the glass cracked. Beneath that, his Halliburton Engineer of the Year plaque. And in the corner of the bin, nestled between a dusty copy of a thermodynamics textbook and a tangle of old cables, was his father's watch, a vintage Omega Seamaster from 1968. It wasn't particularly valuable in terms of money, maybe $1,500, but its sentimental worth was immeasurable. It was the only thing of his father's he had. It was just tossed in there. The leather strap bent at an awkward angle. He picked it up. The crystal was cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the garage. He stood there, staring at the watch in his palm, and in that moment, the entire year of sacrifice, the loneliness, the brutal work, it all curdled into a single cold, quiet point of absolute clarity. He wasn't home. He was a ghost in a house he no longer recognized, haunted by a family that had consumed his life. The art of survival in the immediate aftermath of a devastating discovery is to not react at all. As Marcellus stood in the sweltering garage, his father's watch in his hand, a profound and chilling calm descended upon him. The part of him that wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers, simply went silent. It was replaced by a cold, methodical observer, a part of his engineer's brain that assessed catastrophic failure, not with emotion, but with a quiet, systematic analysis of the damage. He knew with an instinct that bypassed all emotion that any outburst would be used against him. They would call him crazy, irrational, ungrateful. He would give them nothing. He closed the lid on the plastic bin, placed his father's watch carefully in his pocket, and turned to face Kaya, who was hovering in the doorway, her face a mess of anxiety. "Baby, I know this is a shock," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We were going to tell you. It just all happened so fast." Marcellus put on the performance of his life. He let his shoulders slump. He ran a hand over his face, mimicking exhaustion. I'm tired, Kaya," he said, his voice gravelly and low. 22-hour flight. I think my brain isn't working right. It's a lot to take in." Relief washed over her face. He was being manageable. He was being the man she expected him to be, steady, slow to anger, easily placated. "Of course, baby, you're exhausted. Let's get you inside. Don't worry about any of this. We'll sort it all out tomorrow." That night was the first scene in a 3-day play. At the dinner table, he sat in a new, uncomfortable dining chair at the glass-topped table that felt cold and foreign. Odette had cooked a massive meal, and the family ate with a proprietary gusto. Prosper held court from the head of the table, Marcellus's seat, telling a long, boring story about his day. Bishop ate with his phone in one hand, scrolling endlessly. Marcellus played the part of the weary traveler perfectly. He ate little, spoke less. He asked a few simple, non-confrontational questions. "So, when did you guys get here?" "Oh, just a couple of months ago," Odette said breezily, a blatant lie. "The pipes burst in our old place, a real nightmare. Kaya was sweet enough to let us stay here while it gets sorted out." "And Bishop?" Marcellus asked, his eyes on his brother-in-law. "My lease was up," Bishop mumbled, not looking up from his phone. "The timing just worked out." Every word was a lie, a flimsy patch on a story full of holes, but Marcellus just nodded slowly. "I see, that's a lot to deal with, Kaya. You should have told me." "I didn't want to worry you," she exclaimed, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "You had enough on your plate. I was handling it." Later, when she showed him to the guest room where he was to sleep, her former room, as she was now sleeping on the couch to complete the illusion, he just nodded. "Okay, I just need to sleep." He closed the door, and the mask fell away. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the noise in his head. He didn't sleep. He listened. He heard the murmur of their voices downstairs, the occasional burst of laughter. They were celebrating. The awkward part was over. He was back, and he was falling in line. The next morning, Monday, he woke early. He came downstairs to find Odette already in the kitchen. "I'm going to run some errands," he announced calmly. "Need to get a new phone, get my bearings?" "Okay, dear," she said, not turning from the stove where she was frying bacon. "Don't buy that expensive organic bacon again. This cheap kind from Kroger crisps up much better." He walked out of the house he owned, got into his $58-a-day rental car, and drove not to a phone store, but to a quiet Starbucks on Lexington Avenue. He bought a $4 black coffee, sat in a corner booth, and pulled out his laptop. The methodical observer was now in control. First, he accessed the cloud storage, where he kept all his important documents. He downloaded the deed to the Sugar Land house, dated 5 years prior to his marriage. The title was solely in his name, Marcellus James Walker. He saved it to a new, encrypted folder on his desktop. Second, he logged into his online banking. He checked their small joint checking account. It was nearly empty, which wasn't surprising. Then, with his heart pounding, he logged into the separate high-yield savings account with Ali Bank, where the $340,000 from the Angola contract had been deposited. He half expected it to be gone, that Kaya had somehow gained access, but it was all there, every single penny. Plus a few $100s in interest, a wave of profound relief, cold and sharp, washed over him. This was his leverage. This was his power. He spent the next 2 hours digging through old emails and shared photo albums, cross-referencing Kaya's sweet, lonely messages with the reality he now knew. He found an email from Kaya from 6 months ago. "I'm so bored here all by myself, baby, counting the days." Then he found a photo she was tagged in on Bishop's Facebook page from the very same week. It was a picture of Bishop, Odette, and Prosper grinning in his living room, a family game night banner hung behind them on his wall. The lie was so blatant, so arrogant. Tuesday was another day of deception. He forced himself to go back to the house. He made a show of unpacking a few things from his duffel bag in the guest room. He made small talk. While making a pot of coffee, using his own beans he'd picked up at Starbucks, he overheard Odette and Kaya talking in the living room, their voices low. "He seems to be taking it well," Kaya whispered. "See? I told you," Odette replied, her voice smug and confident. "He's a simple man, that one. A pushover. As long as you're sweet to him, tell him he's the king of the castle. He'll do anything. He just wants a quiet life. He'll get used to us being here." Marcellus stood perfectly still by the coffee maker, the sound of the dripping coffee loud in the silence. A simple man. A pushover. The words were like acid. They thought his quiet nature was weakness. They mistook his patience for a lack of a spine. They had made a critical, catastrophic mistake. He poured his coffee into a travel mug, his hand perfectly steady. He had all the evidence he needed. It was time to find a lawyer. On Tuesday afternoon, at precisely 3 p.m., Marcellus walked into a discreet 4-story glass office building in Meyerland, a neighborhood known for its quiet wealth and established professional firms. He had spent the morning researching family law attorneys in Houston, looking for someone with a reputation for being sharp, thorough, and unflinching. He found Odelle Brooks. Her website was minimalist and professional, her bio formidable. 25 years in Texas family law, specializing in complex assets and property division. He'd paid the $500 consultation fee over the phone. The offices of Brooks and Associates were on the top floor. The space was elegant and understated. Dark wood floors, abstract art on the walls, and a view of the city's sprawling canopy of trees. There was no loud music, no clutter. It was a space that radiated competence and control. Odelle Brooks was a handsome black woman in her late 50s. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than Marcellus's monthly salary. Her salt and pepper hair cut in a chic, short style. She stood up when he entered her office and shook his hand firmly. Her eyes were intelligent and missed nothing. "Marcellus, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing to a leather chair opposite her large mahogany desk. "Your call was intriguing. Please tell me everything. Start from the beginning." For the next 45 minutes, Marcellus laid out the story. He didn't editorialize. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke with the calm, dispassionate precision of an engineer detailing a structural failure. He started with the premarital purchase of the house. He detailed the Angola contract, the specific amount earned, and the separate bank account. He described the scene he came home to on Sunday, from the BMW in the driveway to the nursery that had replaced his office. He recounted the lies Kaya and her family had told about the timeline. He mentioned overhearing Odette call him a pushover. Finally, he took out his laptop, turned it to face her, and opened the encrypted folder. Here is a PDF of the original warranty deed for the property, showing me as the sole grantee, dated May 12th, 2017. Our marriage certificate is dated June 20th, 2019. Odelle leaned forward, her eyes scanning the document. A slow, appreciative smile touched her lips. Mr. Walker, you have no idea how refreshing this is. Most clients come in here with a shoebox full of angry text messages and hurt feelings. You've come in with an ironclad case. Here, Marcellus continued, clicking to the next file, is a full statement from the Ally Bank account showing the deposits from Halliburton and the current balance of $341,212. And here is the final confirmation of payment to the mortgage lender sent from that account. Excellent, Odelle murmured, her gaze sharp. The funds from the contract were never commingled in a joint account? Never, Marcellus confirmed. The plan was always to keep it separate for a clean transfer. Kaya agreed to it. She agreed to give you the rope to hang her with, Odelle said, a glint in her eye. She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Okay, here is what we are going to do. The house is your separate property. Under the Texas Family Code, property owned before marriage remains separate property. The fact that her name was never added to the title is the ball game. She has no claim to the equity in the home. None. Marcellus felt a knot of tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. What about her family? They are tenants at sufferance. They have no lease, written or oral. They are occupants with your wife's permission, but not yours, the actual property owner. We will serve them with a formal, notarized 30-day notice to vacate. It is the proper legal way to handle it. We do this by the book, so they have no recourse. She laid out the plan with chilling efficiency. Tomorrow is Wednesday. First thing in the morning, we will file your original petition for divorce. We will cite irreconcilable differences. It's clean, no fault. In the petition, we will clearly list the Sugarland property and the Ally Bank account as your sole and separate property. We will have your wife, Kaya, served with the papers at her place of work. Marcellus flinched slightly. At her job? Yes, Odelle said firmly. It's a strategic move. It ensures she is properly served, and it prevents her from being able to go home and coordinate a story with her family before they are also put on notice. It isolates her. It's harsh, but in this situation, it is necessary. You are dealing with a group of people who have demonstrated a profound lack of respect for you and your property. We must be decisive. Was meinsen trappen, she continued. On Thursday morning, we will have a process server, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy for a civil standby, deliver the eviction notices to each of her family members at the house. The notice will give them 30 days to vacate the premises. We will attach a copy of the deed as Exhibit A. So there is no confusion about who the owner is. It was a breathtakingly swift and comprehensive strategy. It was war, planned with the cool precision of a military campaign. What do I do in the meantime? Marcellus asked. Nothing, Odelle said. You continue to play your part. You are the tired, disoriented husband. Let them believe they are in control right up until the moment they are not. Go back to the house tonight. Tomorrow, find a reason to be out of the house all day. A hotel is best. Do not engage. Do not answer their calls after they are served. All communication will go through my office. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Marcellus said. Good, Odelle nodded. My retainer is $15,000. From that, we will pay the filing fees, the process servers, and my initial hours. Given the evidence you've provided, I expect this to be a relatively straightforward, if unpleasant, process. Her legal position is non-existent. The fight will be emotional, not factual. Marcellus didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? He transferred the $15,000 from his checking account right there in her office. As he walked out into the late afternoon sun, he felt lighter than he had in days. The quiet, methodical observer had found his general. The plan was in motion. They had mistaken his stillness for surrender. They were about to learn the difference. The strike was executed with the dispassionate precision of a controlled demolition. The target was not the structure, but the parasitic ecosystem that had taken root inside it. Wednesday was a day of silence and preparation. Following Odell's instructions, Marcellus left the house early, telling Kaya he was meeting an old colleague from Halliburton to discuss his transition back to the Houston office. It was a plausible lie. He checked into a $250 a night Marriott near the Galleria, a sterile, anonymous room that felt more like home than his own house did. From there, he coordinated with Odell's paralegal via email, signing the final divorce petition electronically. At 11:42 a.m., he received an email confirmation, Case H-2023-14582, in the matter of the marriage of Marcellus J. Walker and Kaya L. Walker, has been filed with the Harris County District Clerk. The first charge was detonated silently, miles away. He spent the rest of the day in the quiet of his hotel room, not watching TV, not listening to music. He was simply waiting. The storm was coming, and he was in its calm, quiet eye. Thursday morning broke bright and clear. At 8:45 a.m., Marcellus was parked down the street from his house in his rental Altima, just as Odell had instructed. He was an observer, nothing more. At precisely 9 a.m., a nondescript Ford sedan pulled up in front of the house. A man in a polo shirt got out, carrying a clipboard. This was the process server. A moment later, a Harris County Sheriff's patrol car pulled up behind him. The deputy, a large, imposing man, got out, but stayed near his vehicle. His presence was the point, a clear, unambiguous signal that this was an official legal proceeding, not a personal dispute to be argued on the porch. The process server walked up the driveway and rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. It was Odette, wearing a silk robe, a mug of coffee in her hand. Marcellus could see her expression from 50 yards away. Annoyance. She likely thought it was a package delivery or a solicitor. The server said something, and her face changed. The annoyance curdled into confusion, then outrage. He handed her a legal-sized envelope. She tried to refuse it to shut the door, but the server simply let it drop at her feet on the welcome mat. "You have been served," he said, his voice inaudible from Marcellus's car, but his purpose clear. Just then Prosper appeared behind Odette, drawn by the commotion. The server addressed him, handed him an identical envelope. Prosper took it, looking at it with a baffled expression. While he was distracted, Bishop came to the door, shirtless. He too was handed an envelope. 3 envelopes, 3 identical notices to vacate, each one giving them 30 days to leave the property. Each one with a copy of the deed to Marcellus's house, attached like a death certificate for their comfortable arrangement. Marcellus watched as Odette finally bent down, snatched up her envelope, and tore it open. He could imagine her eyes scanning the formal legal language, her brain struggling to comprehend the words. Then he saw her eyes land on the attached copy of the deed. He saw her shoulders slump. The fight went out of her. It was the irrefutable proof, the document that vaporized all her arguments and justifications. This was not their house. It was not their daughter's house. It was his, and he was telling them to get out. The family stood clustered in the doorway, a confused and defeated tableau, as the process server got back in his car and drove away. The deputy gave them one last long look before getting back into his patrol car and following. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. in a gleaming office tower downtown. Marcellus didn't see this part, but Odell's office had a second process server ready. He walked into the bustling, open-plan office of the marketing firm where Kaya worked as a $52,000 a year administrative assistant. He calmly asked a receptionist for Kaya Walker. Kaya was called to the front desk, likely assuming it was a flower delivery or a lunch courier. In front of a dozen of her coworkers, the server confirmed her identity and handed her the envelope. "You've been served," he stated, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The humiliation was public and immediate. Her colleagues stared as she took the papers, her face draining of all color. She fumbled with the flap, her hands trembling. She pulled out the original petition for divorce. Her eyes scanned the first page, the cold, formal language a stark contrast to the sweet lies she had been telling for a year. She saw the section on property, the clear declaration that the house in Sugar Land and the funds from the Angola contract were his separate property, not subject to division. Her world collapsed in the middle of her office lobby on a Thursday morning. Back in his hotel room, Marcellus's phone, which had been silent, began to explode. He let every call go to voicemail, just as Odell had instructed. He listened to them later, one by one, a chronological record of a family's unraveling. 10:48 a.m. Voicemail 1, Kaya. Her voice was breathless, confused. "Marcellus? What is this? I just got some papers. At work. Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me. This isn't funny." 11:05 a.m. Voicemail 2, Odette. Pure, sputtering rage. "How dare you? How dare you send a sheriff to this house, to your family? After everything we've done making this house a home for you, you are a cruel, ungrateful man. You can't just throw us out on the street. I'm calling a lawyer." 11:20 a.m. Voicemail 3, Kaya. The anger was gone, replaced by rising panic and tears. "Baby, please, call me back. I don't understand what's happening. My mom is freaking out. Eviction notice? Divorce? What is going on? We can talk about this, baby. Whatever you're mad about, we can fix it. Please just call me." 11:45 a.m. Voicemail 4, Bishop. A low, menacing tone, the impotent fury of a freeloader whose free ride had just ended. "Yo, you think you're slick, huh? Sending papers like you're some kind of gangster. You're gonna regret this, man. You don't do this to family. You better answer your phone." It was a hollow threat, the kind made by someone with no power, and Marcellus felt nothing. 12:15 p.m. Voicemail 5, Kaya. Full-blown pleading. The performance was over. This was raw desperation. Okay, you're mad about them being here. I get it. I'm sorry. I'll make them leave. I'll tell them to go right now. Just please don't do this. Don't divorce me. We can fix this. I love you. Don't you love me? 1:30 p.m. Voicemail 6, Prosper. For the first time, his father-in-law's voice. It wasn't angry, just defeated and bewildered. "Marcellus, son, I don't know what to say. Odette she's very upset. I think we all just misunderstood. Call your wife, son. Just talk to her." 2:45 p.m. Voicemail 7, Kaya. Hysterical crying. Incoherent words. "Can't believe you. After everything. I did everything for you. Kept the house safe. I hate you. No, I don't. I love you. Please, just call me. Please." Marcellus listened to the last message, then deleted them all. He forwarded the one from Bishop to Odell, just for the record. Then he turned his phone off. The demolition was complete. Now came the cleanup. The collapse of the world Kaya and her family had built inside Marcellus's home was not a single event, but a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of their own arrogance and greed. Marcellus watched from a distance, insulated by his lawyer and his own quiet resolve, as their lives unraveled, piece by piece. The first consequence was for Kaya. The public humiliation of being served divorce papers at her office was just the beginning. Her boss called her into a meeting the next day. The disruption, combined with what her manager vaguely termed concerns about her judgment, led to her being fired from her $52,000 a year administrative assistant job. They gave her 2 weeks severance. Suddenly, she was not only facing a divorce, but was also unemployed. Her frantic calls to lawyers were met with the same cold reality. Without access to marital funds, since the only significant funds were Marcellus's separate property, she couldn't afford the retainer to fight him. The best any of them could offer was to negotiate a settlement. But as Odell had predicted, there was nothing to negotiate. The law was entirely on Marcellus's side. The house was his. The money was his. Kaya was entitled to half of the joint checking account, which held $742 and half the value of her own 2018 Honda Accord. That was it. The second consequence fell upon Odette and Prosper. Their outrage quickly dissolved into panic as the 30-day deadline approached. They had no legal recourse. Every lawyer Odette called told her the same thing. They were tenants at sufferance and had to comply with the notice to vacate. They had sold their own small home in a less fashionable part of Houston years ago, cashing in on the equity and assuming they could live with one of their children indefinitely. They had no savings to speak of. Their pride was shattered. They had swaggered into Marcellus's home like conquering heroes, only to be ejected like common squatters. The reality of their situation was stark. They were in their 60s, with no home, no assets, and entirely dependent on their now unemployed children. The third consequence was for Bishop. His bravado evaporated the moment he realized his comfortable life was over. With no job, no savings, and no sister to support him, his options were zero. He couldn't afford a deposit on an apartment, and his credit was shot. His $3,000 gaming rig, the altar at which he'd worshipped, became his only asset. He sold it on Facebook Marketplace for a desperate $500. It was just enough to rent a small U-Haul trailer. His grand Houston adventure was over. He was forced to make a humiliating retreat, driving his beat-up old car back to his extended family's home in rural Louisiana, the very place he had spent years mocking as a backwater town. His punishment was to be returned to the life he thought he had escaped. As the 30-day clock ticked down, Marcellus began the process of reclaiming his life. He hired a junk removal service for $500. On the 30th day, with the family's possessions finally gone, the crew came in. Marcellus instructed them to take everything that wasn't his: the gaudy white sectional, the glass and chrome dining table, the hideous faux leather recliner, the cheap floral bedding, the mismatched kitchen utensils. All of it was hauled away. He told the crew to donate anything usable to a local charity. He wanted no trace of them left. Next, he hired a deep cleaning crew for $800. They scrubbed the house from top to bottom, erasing the lingering smell of fried food and synthetic pine. They shampooed the carpets and polished the floors, restoring the home's neutral, clean scent. Then, Marcellus began the most important work himself. He went to the garage and one by one brought in the 6 plastic bins. He methodically, lovingly, unpacked his own life. He wiped the dust from each of his engineering textbooks and arranged them back on the shelves he had reinstalled in his office. He polished the cracked glass on his diploma and hung it back on the wall. He placed his Engineer of the Year award back on his desk. He took out his father's watch, wound it, and set it in its old spot, its quiet ticking a comforting, steady heartbeat in the silent room. The last room he addressed was the nursery. He spent a weekend repainting it himself, covering the sickly yellow with the serene, dark navy blue it had been before. He disassembled the crib and the changing table piece by piece and left them on the curb with a free sign. Within an hour, they were gone. By the end of the month, the house was quiet again. It was his. The silence wasn't empty or lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of order restored. The divorce was finalized in record time. Kaya, unable to afford a legal battle, signed the papers. She walked away with half the value of her car and a mountain of credit card debt from the furniture she had bought to fill his house. Marcellus kept his home, his savings, his retirement accounts, and most importantly, his peace of mind. The cascade of consequences had washed away the rot, leaving behind a clean, solid foundation on which he could rebuild. A year passed. The sharp edges of the betrayal had softened, not into forgiveness for them, but into a quiet peace for himself. The seasons in Houston had turned, the brutal summer giving way to a mild winter, and then a vibrant green spring. Marcellus found that his life, once stripped down to its studs, had been rebuilt stronger and more authentically than before. He was standing on the 4th floor of the Halliburton campus on North Belt, looking out the vast glass window as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The glass towers of the city shimmered in the distance, but his focus was closer. Beside him stood a young man named David, a recent graduate from Prairie View A&M, his alma mater's rival, a fact they joked about often. David was a brilliant, eager black engineer, one of the first apprentices in a new mentorship program Marcellus had volunteered to lead. So the pressure differential is what causes the fluid displacement, even at that depth, David said, pointing to a complex diagram on his tablet. I was running the simulation, and I couldn't figure out why the values were spiking. Marcellus looked over the data, a familiar comfort. You're not accounting for the thermal gradient, he said, pointing to a specific variable. At 10,000 feet, the temperature drop is significant. It changes the viscosity of the drilling mud. Adjust for that, and your model will stabilize. David's eyes lit up. Of course, the thermal gradient. Thank you, Mr. Walker. It's Marcellus. He corrected him gently for the 10th time. And you were close. You just have to remember that every system has hidden variables. The key is learning how to see them. He had received a significant promotion and a bonus for his work in Angola, but he found that the real reward was this: sharing his knowledge, helping a new generation find their footing. It gave his work a purpose beyond a paycheck. He saw his younger self in David, ambitious, a little naive, but full of potential. He felt a responsibility to guide him, not just in engineering, but in life. His days settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. He no longer lived for the promise of a far-off future. He lived in the texture of the present. He found joy in simple things. On weekends, he would drive to Buffalo Bayou Park, the green heart of the city, and walk the winding trails. He loved the feeling of the sun on his skin, the sight of kayakers paddling on the murky water, the sound of the city humming around him. The walks were a form of meditation. He would look at the skyline, the glass towers that once represented a certain kind of ambition, and feel no envy, no pull. He had learned that emotional distance was a far greater luxury than any corner office. His house in Sugar Land was no longer just a property or an asset. It was a sanctuary. It was filled with the things he loved: the scent of brewing coffee, the sound of jazz music on his vintage turntable, the quiet company of his books. The rooms were no longer stages for a life, but spaces to actually be lived in. The cramped apartment he'd imagined Kaya and her family in was a stark contrast to the spacious peace he now inhabited. His modest life, once seen by them as a canvas for their own desires, was now revealed to be a fortress of self-respect. One Saturday, he received a letter. It was from Kaya. It had been forwarded from Odell's office. His first instinct was to throw it away, but he opened it. The letter was short, the handwriting shaky. She apologized. She said she was sorry for the hurt, for her weakness, for letting her family's greed consume their marriage. She said she was working a retail job, living in a small apartment with her mother, and was trying to pay off her debts. She didn't ask for anything. He read it, folded it, and put it away. He felt a flicker of pity, but not regret. Her downfall was the consequence of her own choices. He had simply held up a mirror. He found that he could forgive her, not for her sake, but for his. Forgiveness was the final act of reclaiming his own peace, releasing the last bit of anger that tethered him to the past. We often believe that wealth is measured in dollar amounts, in paid-off homes and fat bank accounts. But the past year had taught Marcellus a different kind of accounting. True wealth is integrity. It's the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth. It's the freedom to close your own front door and be at peace in a space that is authentically yours. A home is not built of brick and mortar, but of respect and honesty. And a life, a truly rich life, is built not on what you own, but on what you will not compromise. He had sacrificed a year of his life for a house, but in the end, he had gained a priceless understanding of himself. And that was a foundation that no one could ever occupy or take away. What does home truly mean to you? Is it a place, a feeling, or the people you share it with? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride.